Alors, c'est Monsieur Sinan Birdal, chercheur à Institut des sciences politiques, c'est ça, toujours à l'Université libre de Berlin.
Oui.
C'est à vous pour 20 minutes, 20 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to be the proverbial us-solist here, and only befittingly I will talk about sex and sex in Eurasia. So yeah. So why is this topic involved? So my field is basically international relations theory. I actually trained as in sort of feminist methodologies and queer methodologies in international relations. And so my topic is today is actually part of my larger research project, which explores the emergence of the so-called pink frontier in world politics. In other words, the division of world politics into states which are supportive of gender equality and LGBT rights versus states who are against it. And this is actually, at least for a decade now, it is emerging as one of the major divisions in world politics, especially in forums in United Nations. Just to give you a sense of for how long this is continuing, basically 1995 Beijing Forum for Action, which is the UN's 4th World Conference on Women, was actually one of the epitomes of global feminist movement. This is basically a conference which confirmed a lot of the feminist demands for equality and progress in world politics. However, something happened, as feminist scholars point out, between 1995 and 2008, which saw sort of a backlash against gender equality. And it is in this sense that my larger research project actually looks at Africa, Eastern and Central Europe in comparison with Turkey. So I'm trying to sort of understand also what regional identity and regional politics plays in this kind of emergence of this new battlefield. And of course, in this, since we're talking about Eurasia, what does Eurasianism say about gender equality and LGBT rights? Guess what? They don't like it. Okay, so let me start. And this is, again, you can think that, well, this is so absurd. How can a geographical entity like Eurasia, like a continent, be sexed? Or be thought of as like, okay, we are a continent of this and that sexuality. It's just so weird. But I mean, is this as weird as thinking of a certain color of belonging to a certain sex? Like, pink being a girlish color, or blue being like a manly color, or something like that. So, and I'm just going to go with our favorite guy today, Doğu Perinçek, who just a year ago he said something like, there was this, rising tension between Greece and Turkey, in the Levant, in the Eastern Mediterranean, and he comes out and says, now what we have here is the homosexual gods of Athens, Rome, and Washington, swimming in Levantine waters. So, how is this even possible? So you have these, homosexual gods, of course Western, and now they are coming to invade sort of, the Eastern Mediterranean, and of course, and he says actually he's Levantine, yeah. So he's actually he knows that this is such an absurd question. So he says, you might ask when waters are getting hotter and hotter in Eastern Mediterranean, what is this question like? What is the significance of this question? But it has a lot, he says, and because now so this is now the coalition of these sort of homosexual gods. You have the US, Israel, France, Greece, and Cyprus imposing homosexuality to Eastern Mediterranean. And of course, at the end of it, and now he says, the gods have even a convention, an international agreement that they are bringing upon us from the heavens. It's called the Istanbul Convention. And this is why I care about this whole absurd, statement. This was almost like a year before this whole thing got started, okay? So we had already something, being boiled up, which is still a very vital issue to women and LGBT plus people living in Turkey. And around the same time, he also made a statement, gave a statement about the president of the head of the what is it called? The Director of Religious Affairs, Diyanet, right? Who just declared in his Friday sermon that coronavirus happened because of homosexuality. And so there was a huge backlash against this, right? So against this sort of, medicalization, if you will, of sexuality. So Perinçek also gave support to the head of the Director of Religious Affairs, which is, if you know, Perinçek's history is just kind of weird because, his whole life he's been sort of battling against this sort of Islamism and religious, fundamentalism and so on and so forth. So he was sort of presenting himself as the bastion of secularism and so on and so forth. And now he's coming in support of this mufti against against the LGBT and the women's rights. His position is actually not new, and as I will show you in comparison with Russian Eurasianists, he even beats Russian Eurasianists in terms of homophobia. Starting very early during the 1990s, when a new leftist party was emerging, right? The Freedom and Solidarity Party, and they were bringing these new issues to the fore, like sort of the issues of the new left, if you will, feminism and queer rights and so on and so forth. He wrote this diatribe against this sort of emerging new left. It's called Alienation and Homosexuality, which is, I'm not going to go through this whole thesis, but what is striking here is that he says at the start, in this book he says, you won't find anything about biology, genetics, medicine, or psychiatry. So his whole mode of homophobia, as I will explain, there are several modes of homophobia in Turkey, is not medicalization. It is more or less historicization. So in his whole idea in this book is basically that homosexuality emerges when a certain mode of production reaches a state of corruption. So, for example, slave mode of production, right? When it reached its peak of, this sort of Hegelian / Marxian idea, when it reached a stage where it became really corrupt, and then this is the time where homosexuality emerges, and the emergence of homosexuality actually denotes that the enslavement of women. Homosexuality emerges because women are kicked out of male-dominated public sphere. So men only perceive other men as objects of love, right? So this sort of Platonic idea. Anyway, so the first time I thought about this, and I started working on this issue in almost a decade ago, 2010. I thought Partha Chatterjee's work on third world nationalism was very relevant. How sort of third world nationalism divides the social world into two. There is the public sphere of economy, statecraft, where you should borrow from the West, economics, military, statecraft, and so on and so forth. But then there is also a spiritual world, a social world of religion, family, and morality, where you assert your superiority against the West, right? So, and in this sense, like 10 years ago, I detected three kinds of homophobic discourses. Excommunication, basically homosexuality as a sin. According to Islam, you should not engage in homosexual behavior. or criminalization, that basically homosexuals were, criminals. French legions raped Algerian boys, or Nazis raped the whole world, or that, American soldiers invading Iraq were big, homosexual rapists, stuff like that. Even somebody came up, this Nevzat Tarhan, for example, who made the headlines, just recently, was talking about Vlad the Impaler, right? The 15th century Wallachian prince as the sort of, sort of paradigmatic, homosexual. So, because that's what homos do, invade and rape. And then the third discourse was actually about medicalization. Again, Nevzat Tarhan is a very important figure here. Unfortunately, I can't talk about him today, but a very interesting figure because he is also an expert in psychological warfare, working for this private security military company, Sadat, also called the Praetorian Guard of Erdogan. So, and there are, in my other work, I find a lot of parallels between the conversion therapy, which is basically converting homos into heterosexuals, and the kind of psychological warfare techniques that Sadat is employing. Coming back to Eurasianism now. So, as I said, Pericek's view of this, sort of this Marxist theory of homosexuality is kind of different from all these sorts of, medicalization, criminalization, and excommunication approaches. So, how can we think about this emerging homophobia? Because it's a weird coalition. It's now bringing people like Hilal Kaplan, who is this big, proponent of excommunicating the gays, a spokesperson for
She's a woman.
For Erdoganists. And these sort of Eurasianists, ex-Marxists or whatnot. Emil Edenborg, who is a Swedish specialist of Russian politics, has this wonderful notion called discourse coalitions. And I think this also kind of applies to all these, confusion about what to make out of, Eurasianism. Because what you have here in these discourse coalitions is basically, you have ideologies, religious or political views from very different trajectories, communicating, and then producing important interventions by basically putting forward certain storylines and metaphors. So, and this is what I'm trying to do in this research, is trying to understand, what are the sort of political conditions, what is happening, that is bringing all these diverse people together so that they share certain metaphors and certain storylines to intervene forcefully into an arena, which is, unfortunately, for women and for LGBT people, at this point, this idea of the struggle against sort of moral decay of the West, which is the gender ideology. What's the Russian word? The ideologia gendernaya or something like that, right? So there's gender ideology, which is weird because who invented this idea of gender ideology? Vatican, right? It was totally fabricated by the Holy See in the early 1990s, before it was taken over by, the Orthodox clergy, and how this whole thing comes together, for example. And now talk about the Russian anti-genderism, right? This, for example, World Congress of Families, which is a joint organization by American born-again Christians and Orthodox Slavophiles. And they even had this conference, even though it was officially canceled, they still held this conference right after the invasion of Crimea. when officially all the ties were severed, these right-wing, religious fundamentalists still met together and came together. And it is huge, a lot of the feminist political economists basically point out how, they actually, we have these networks investigated, and we can actually see the flow of money into the construction of these global alliances. The only country missing that I'm really investigating right now is Turkey. Where does Turkey fit into this? Because I can possibly imagine that there's so much money going around, in the world when it comes to, especially, financing all these, right-wing reactionary propaganda, and Turkey is going to miss that. That's hardly believable. But one of the interesting things that we have here with respect to, for example, Russian anti-gender and anti-LGBT discourse is, yes, there are things that, confirmed my earlier sort of hunch on third world nationalism, or basically on particularism, right? We are Russian here. We don't have any homos, right? That kind of stuff. But that's not the only thing, though. There is also, yes, they are referring to Slavophilism, to Russian Messianism, and to Eurasianism. But there is also something that is emerging, especially after 2009 and especially after 2012. I mean, 2011, 2012, when Putin comes back to the presidency with a vengeance. This is the time where, this whole anti-gender and anti-LGBT discourse takes off. So this is basically, and there are several studies about that, it's basically, an instrument of coalition building within Russia, right? So it's not a coincidence, that this happens, that's, that explaining the timing of the emergence of this discourse is very important, and, political contingencies play a larger role in this. So what we have here, this almost happened around the same time, imagine, 2011, 2012, a lot of people objected to electoral results in Russia. People took it to the streets, and around the same time, 2013, you have the Gezi protests in Turkey. But there were already several protests prior to Gezi, right? So what we have here is this emergence of this anti-gender, anti-LGBT agenda, both in Russia and in Turkey, and this is where the Eurasianists on both sides click, okay? And what do they click on? That they, basically at the UN, Russia starts very aggressively blocking all sort of gender initiatives, women's initiatives, who are they allying themselves with? With Iran, with Saudi Arabia, with, all these countries who are even in conflict with each other, right? They are being enlisted to this crusade of sort of moral values, and now they actually come up with a competing universalism rather than the particularism. They say, well, these values, I don't know about the West, but the rest of the world doesn't think like you do. Right? So they come actually with a competing universalist rhetoric, which is very important. So since I have 2 minutes, I just want to emphasize two things. First of all, that Dugin, in his book, The Fourth Political Theory, has a whole chapter on gender, where he comes up with his own notion of gender, which is gender as Dasein. I don't know, Heidegger just, probably flipped in his grave, which is fine, I don't like him. Or, he is inspired by who? René Guénon, Giulio Evola, these kind of so you get the credentials of this Eurasianism, right? And this is very interesting. he says, you know, we suggest taking a step towards gender as Dasein, despite the notorious representations and opprobrium that will cause, very dramatic, by going beyond the limits of gender which we know, we get to the domain of uncertainty, androgyny, and sex practiced by the angels. Hallelujah. So the only problem here is like this androgyny. So this is, for example, this is so not Perinček. Not at all. If you say androgyny to Perinček, he'll shoot you. You know, so this is a very interesting. So there's even like a opinion op-ed by somebody who suggests, you know, is Dugin becoming the next queer theorist, right? So anyway, but you know, the thing is, for example, Leonid Sabin, who is one of the editors of Geopolitica, you know, RU or something, right? So he gives these interviews to the Aydınlık newspaper, right? To Perinček's newspaper, where he talks about we have to fight this multiculturalism, transhumanism, LGBT, etc. together because our spiritual foundations are being destroyed, right? And again, the practical consequence of this is that the head of the women's organization of Perinček's women's organization comes out and basically not only suggests that, you know, okay, we should get out of the Istanbul Convention. The Istanbul Convention is actually is not about women's equality. Is actually imposing the gender language. Is imposing you know homosexuality on this nation. But not only that, they also support the Kurds. Because they talk about that there is no, that you cannot discriminate based on ethnicity, race, and stuff and such, which is basically also a separatist agreement. So, and you know, I can't unfortunately talk about this, but you know, I actually had, you know, searched Google, a very quick search where I searched, okay, you know, homosexuality and terrorism. You cannot believe how many news appeared over the last 5 to 6 years, which talk about terrorists being caught in flagranto, right? So it's sort of oh, this PKK terrorist was caught in northern Iraq while he was having sex with this man. And stuff like that, Or, for example, this homosexual turned out to be a terrorist or stuff like that. So there is, and this is important, basically, because it actually puts, the LGBT community and feminists as a target for a militarized, masculinized, nation states. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Indeed, very surprising. I myself I knew that there were homophobia, but indeed I never made the link between what you said in 2012 when Putin, there are demonstrations, he feels threatened because the people are in the street for the first time, and they say openly it's young people like in Gezi, but very interesting indeed how this movement try to control the sexuality of the people. So, and we see this not only in the countries you mentioned, but also in Poland. Also,
yes,
it's a big issue.
Hungary.
And the whole unifying thinking is that this is la décadence. This is it means decadence, chaos, déclin, and I remember myself when in 2015 when the HDP in June got so many votes. There was a declaration from Kandil telling that what is this HDP doing in Istanbul, for example, because HDP in Istanbul was very pro-LGBT, very. So Kandil was kind of didn't like it so much. it was interesting because they were having the point of view of the Rajanist or the fascist or or all the rest. So it's a large. It could be there could be a large consensus against this the freedom, the gender equality, and so on. And what do you think? Do you think they can succeed in unifying themselves?
Some people call this basically the glue effect, because this is so interesting. Sexuality, and the buzzword for this is of course family. We want to protect our children. We want to protect the family. And what we have here is not just LGBT people, reproductive rights. So basically, abortion, the right to abortion, and also the right to have your sort of genetic technology being used for single mothers, right? Which has been prohibited, for example, in Turkey. So, and of course, the third one is sex education in schools. So these are the three issues that we see very heavily, in Africa, in Eastern and Central Europe, in Turkey, but also in Latin America right now, with Brazil, for example, which is a total backlash. Mind you, we had just had this talk over lunch, right? Marine Le Pen having, 20%. Marine Le Pen is a regular in these meetings, which, and she's very adamant about it, family, what is this talk about gender? Right, gender mainstreaming and stuff like that. There is also a big debate, for example, in Germany. And in Germany, I was basically shocked. In Germany, it was like feminism never even existed. It's mind-blowing. So even and you have in countries where, for example, in Ireland. There's a wonderful book called Heteroactivism. So, for example, there is a new emerging, counter movement against all these sort of acquired rights of feminist and LGBT, movement, starting from the very West, right? So, or for example, take Trump, right? So, things are very much on the balance, and what is really, and this is why this project, is very important to me as a topic, because this is not being studied. How all these forces actually coordinate globally, from Trump, Pentecostals, born against Catholic Church, Islamists,
and you said with
Orthodoxy.
a lot of money.
Russian
Yes, and a lot of money. Yes. And they have all these different kinds of Congress of Family and this and that, and they do a lot of coordination at the UN as well. So they are operating at multiple levels, at the UN level, they are blocking all these attempts to have another women's conference. They are blocking, reports and such in human rights commissions at the UN, So they are very aggressively funding this sort of global backlash, and there is basically no or very few studies of it. There is really not much of a scholarly attention given to that. And it might not look like, of course, I am an international relations theorist, right? So I had to study a lot of geopolitics, mainstream, this and that, and I know this is not about economy, it's not about energy, it's not about guns, and it's not about directly, but it is actually about that. It is about all of that. This is why this is such an important issue, and I think, yes, they do have a chance. Look at Turkey. This is why I think Turkey is an important case, and because in terms of region, there is always, as you said in your opening speech, what is Turkey? Is it Europe? Is it Asia? Is it, what is it? Balkans, Caucasia? Or, what is this regional identity that, we're struggling with all the time? And bypassing the question, do we really need a regional identity? do I have to identify myself as Asian or Eurasian or European or so whatever. So as I said again, I think it's a very important issue, and it's not only an issue for Central and Eastern Europe, not only an issue for Africa, but also an issue for France, for the UK, for America, so also for the West.
Excuse me, just a word. What was the name of the guy you mentioned? Nevzatar
Tarhan.
Comment ça s'appelle? Tarhan.
I had another presentation just last week about him. I had to read all his theories about psychiatry. He's a military psychiatrist, basically, who was also involved in torturing, political inmates during the coup in 1980. He's very, important, figure. So he's an expert in, converting people from something into something else.
And what is the link to Sadat?
He was, when I first started this project, which was back, 3 years ago, I was in the US, and I started working on him. He was working as the expert on political warfare, psychological warfare. Then I came, Sadat, yeah. And then I went back to Turkey, so I stopped working on this project because I just wanted to have my own peace of mind. And then I started working on it again when I started this job at Freie Universität. And then just recently, this guy came up in Sedat Peker's testaments, where he suggested that Nevzat Tarhan was actually a shareholder of this company, and he said no, so he leaked some documents about it, and documenting basically how he sold his shares to General Adnan Tanrıverdi. So on and so forth. So one of them, this is a very it's a very hard topic to study, because you have to actually go, the way I went around this was I started with a prosopography of these people. So basically I had to go and look at the biographies of each and every individual and sort of speculate, well, how did they all come together? Because I've known you for years. Do we have a company together? No, because we don't have money. But apart from that, how do you get to know other people? But how do you also find money, and how do you start business together? And this is not just any business, right? It's a business of. It's a very, very important company. The only similar company that you have to Sadat is Wagner Group.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it's still different from the Wagner Group, because Wagner Group doesn't do psychological warfare inside Russia, whereas Sadat does. Secondly, they don't have a separate geopolitical doctrine, which Sadat has. It's called Africanism or Afrasianism. I think I like that better, actually. It sounds more sexy. Afrasianism. So it's not Eurasianism, but it's Africa and Asia together. So it's another sort of revamp of Erbakan's D8 project, right? Muslim countries of Asia and Africa coming together. But anyway, so that's Nevzat Tarhan started working there, but then he denies it, and now in Peker's statements, he's still there. He must be really, really, even more important than I imagined, since he was named by Sedat Peker himself. So he's
Bien.
I don't want to spoil the specificity of your point, of your approach, which is very interesting, and thank you for your presentation. Very interesting. But don't you think there is, you can bring this to control people by sexuality, which is as old as humanity. Now it is on LGBT. Before that, 50 years before that, it was on women. It's only, I mean, you look at what Afghanistan does, look at what the Islamist does everywhere, and look what has been done in Europe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and still going on. So, I mean, this is the LGBT and the gender approach, etc., would be another kind of people controlled by sexuality. So, I would say, but I don't want you to. Nothing new on the ceiling. no, it's not that. What's very interesting on what you are studying is all the networks that it puts together. So in this sense, there is a very new problematic, very new, and the gathering capacity is different.
Another thing that is, I think, emerging on the horizon is this concept of femonationalism.
What?
So, femonationalism or homonationalism. So basically, you can basically have, like in the Netherlands, right? You can have actually a openly homosexual politician heading a racist party. Or you could have actually somebody like Ms. Thatcher or like Marine Le Pen saying, oh, I'm a woman, don't try to teach me what feminism is. So you can actually have these, a lot of the, main points or struggles of the feminist movement and LGBT movement taking away from them and using even against them by these, politicians. So this is, in Turkey, for example, Meral Akşener will be the perfect candidate for that. But for the next one, why not having like a strong woman, sitting as prime minister? She already claimed that, chair for herself even before elections. She says, I'm the next prime minister. Well, who says that? Herself. So imagine that kind of feminist, quote-unquote, attitude, and like what she was going to offer to Kurdish women or to LGBT women, So, again, what is new about that? Yes, of course, sex is always a way of control. In that sense, there is not much novelty I can offer. But what is really important here, I think, is, and this is really what I'm interested in. I am trained as a theorist, but I see theory more like in the ancient Greek sense of theory, like observing and watching, and So I'm really interested in like what is going on here.
Yes, you're right.
And these subterranean counter movements and counter currents that are, I think, very important. And at one point,
Please continue.
They're emerging and they're just like blowing in our faces.
Oui, il est là, hein,
Il y a quelqu'un qui...
Bon, moi, c'est la gestion du temps. Hein.
C'est bon, non, mais...
Il est 5h30.
Okay. Ça va, on peut continuer, personne ne nous chasse. Mais toi, tu as pas...
Moi, j'ai des choses comme ça.
D'accord. Bon, écoute, tu peux prendre ta place.
Oui, et bon, 10 minutes après, je m'en vais. Ok.
Thank you very much. What's interesting about this
Un peu plus fort.
You can...
Okay. Thank you very much. It was very interesting to learn about these networks within international organizations and so on. I was wondering if you had paid any attention to Chinese, participation to this kind of blockades, or if you could notice some networks with this religious forces and so on. I don't know.
China is very interesting. I mean, you are right. So China, in terms of, this is why I don't have Asia as one of my comparative cases, because it's interesting. For example, in Pakistan and India, you have the Hijra recognized legally, and it goes, it has a traditional place, the third gender. In South Asia, for example. So when it comes to this third sex, they're not bothered by that. With Vietnam, for example, what you have is like very liberal on LGBTs, no problem at all. But they would never advocate LGBT rights globally. China is interesting because China, it is, although they have these restrictions on internet searches and so on and so forth, they never went as far as Russia to sort of, launch a huge campaign against LGBT people. You don't have anything like you have, for example, like camps in Chechnya, right? They had these, we know about these camps, abductions of people in Chechnya, for example. We don't have anything like that sort in China. We have it in Xinjiang, but not in, against, other population groups, but not, LGBT. But globally, they are, of course, as the word today was, sovereignist, right? So they are very sovereignist in the sense that, national sovereignty, we don't do universal, human rights. The only universal rule that China is ever going to recognize is the right of, national sovereignty, for now. But they don't really advocate. It is Russia which is, the vanguard of these movements. So I'm not a Chinese expert, but I'm just telling you what I saw, in the literature. And also, one little thing, usually people, what they do is they, for example, look at laws which are criminalizing sexual acts, same sexual acts. That is not a good indicator. Just putting it out there. For example, Singapore, because of British colonialism, has still sodomy laws. So in Singapore, it is illegal. It is a crime for the people of the same sex to have sex. Yet Singapore is also home to a flourishing LGBT community because these laws are not being enforced. Whereas in Russia, right, there is no law criminalizing same-sex acts. Right? Same-sex sexuality is not a crime in Russia, but the propaganda of same-sex is a crime. So you have, or for example, which country was that? An African country, for example. I can't remember, where they had actually again, because of the British Empire, right, and the 19th century Victorian sodomy laws are still valid there, so if you have sex, that's a crime. But it's not only it is not enforced, but the parliament just passed a law basically prohibiting discrimination based on sex and sexual orientation. So if you have sex, that's a crime. But if somebody discriminates you on your job because you're a homosexual, then that's a crime as well. So you can have, so you have to go deep, go deeper. But again, non-entrepreneurship, as we call it in international relations. So what kind of activism states engage in at the international level is a totally different issue. And this is the most important. I don't even believe that Putin actually gives a flying, about sexuality or homosexuals or lesbians. He doesn't give it. He doesn't care. I don't think he cares about this at all. But it is an instrument for him to mobilize a huge group of countries, which usually he wouldn't be able to bring together.
Thank you.
So, est-ce que vous voulez conclure?
Oui, vas-y, conclue, et je vais conclure ta conclusion.
Je pensais, pour répondre sur la Chine, c'est que la Chine a d'autres moyens de contrôler sa population. Et donc, elle n'a pas besoin d'embêter les LGBT, puisque, y compris, on vient de le voir avec la joueuse de tennis, quand elle dénonce effectivement un viol, elle disparaît de la circulation et on ne sait pas très bien ce qu'elle a accepté pour pouvoir réapparaître. Donc on a des systèmes où la contrainte des corps est même plus nécessaire, puisqu'elle s'exerce dans un système politique qui est total et qui s'est complètement renforcé. Donc c'est pas qu'on doive trouver qu'au fond Xi Jinping a une certaine, j'allais dire, indifférence ou vis-à-vis des LGBT, c'est qu'il les contrôle autrement. Je suis très étonnée de ce que vous avez dit sur le Vietnam, en disant qu'on foutait la paix aux LGBT au Vietnam. Pour être allé plusieurs fois au Vietnam et connaître un peu, je suis assez étonnée. Mais je pense que c'est le même régime qu'en Chine, on contrôle la population. Il suffit de voir d'ailleurs comment on a contrôlé la population pendant la pandémie, tant en Chine qu'au Vietnam.
Oui.
Donc c'est pas qu'ils soient plus libéraux, c'est qu'ils ont d'autres moyens de contrôler les populations, je crois. Voilà, ça me semble. Mais ceci étant, votre intervention est extrêmement importante et intéressante. Mais pour être moins pessimiste, quand vous avez parlé du Brésil, Bolsonaro n'est peut-être pas encore pour très longtemps à la tête du Brésil, et il y a aussi tout un mouvement au Brésil qui est très opposé à cet évangélisme pur et dur, même si on a des mouvements catholiques qui deviennent qui prennent les méthodes évangéliques aujourd'hui. Mais tout n'est pas forcément aussi négatif, en tout cas espérons-le. Et je reviens à une autre intervention quand vous avez parlé de la jeunesse. La jeunesse n'a rien à faire de toutes ces histoires de racisme ou il y a une jeunesse, il y en a une qui va être d'extrême droite et qui va être d'ultra-droite. Elle existe. Et elle existe aussi aux États-Unis, elle existe en France, mais il y en a toute une autre et qui n'a rien à voir avec ça. Et espérons que cette jeunesse-là nous libérera de ce machisme voilà, et de ce contrôle. Voilà.
Bon.
En tout cas, vous avez eu une très très belle après-midi. Je
Oui.
regrette de ne pas avoir écouté la matinée.
Alors, je voudrais conclure en vous remerciant tous pour votre présence. Je crois que je voudrais remercier Ali Jan pour son impulsion disciplinaire, scientifique sur ce sujet. Je crois qu'on a eu un regard... pardon? Je crois qu'on a eu un regard très diversifié, avec plusieurs facettes, différentes facettes de leur asianisme, autant géographique que théorique et conceptuelle, dans l'histoire de la Turquie et dans ses relations avec la Russie. Bon, c'est pas fini. D'abord, Ali Jan n'a pas terminé sa thèse que nous attendrons. Et puis, bon, toute cette question reste un peu ouverte. La dernière facette et la innovatrice de la journée fut donc eurasianisme et sexe, qui est aussi une approche que je salue comme une innovation stimulante. Merci à tous, merci à Kort et à Emmett pour nous avoir hébergés, et bonne soirée à tous.
Merci.
Merci.